6:19 in the morning. You're on the Wake Up Tucson show. 790-2040 is the phone number. wakeuptucson@gmail.com. Let's go over to the Ed Alexander hotline. Let's go to caller Jeff Flake on line 2. Jeffrey, good morning, sir. How are you doing?
Hey, great. Thanks for having me on, Chris.
Well, you got a fun day ahead of you today. It's one of your biggest fans is doing a rally over at the in Phoenix today after a visit to beautiful Yuma. What's your day going to look like today in the great state of Maricopa?
Actually, I'm going to be in Tucson. I will drive down in just a bit, and got several meetings that we've had planned for several weeks. So I'll be in your part of the state.
The couple of questions I had for you. When you had your quote about the conservatives being swept up by xenophobia, nativism, and that, who specifically did you? We know the president, but when you say conservatives have lost their way on, who are you specifically talking about?
No, I think in general, Republicans have been, unfortunately, I think, caught up in this populist kind of fervor. Anti-free trade. You see far too many Republicans coming out against trade agreements when that's really the only way to catch up to globalization that's already occurred. And the failure to call out those who refer to Mexican immigrants as rapists, or when the president in the campaign referred to a judge born in Indiana as a Mexican in a pejorative way. We've got to call out statements like that. We can't be the party that allows those kind of statements to go on if we're going to be a majority party in the future.
So my two questions to that is, one, other than the president, because he's not conservative, first and foremost. So the question is, because you said conservatives have lost their way. The president's not conservative. 3 years ago, he was probably a pro-abortion Democrat. So other than the president, what conservatives have lost their way on being xenophobes and nativists?
Well, we hear statements not just from the president, and keep in mind this book, this book that I wrote, it doesn't just talk about the president. I talk about the party going back a decade or two. I was elected in 2001 in the House of Representatives. We as Republicans, controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House at that time. And we didn't behave well as Republicans. We quit being the party of limited government. We spent, as people say, like drunken sailors.
True.
We gave up the mantle of fiscal conservatism, and so that forced us to start talking about things like flag burning or wedge issues or riling up people on immigration and scapegoating certain groups and classes instead of addressing the issues that Republicans and conservatives had addressed prior to that.
So
government, economic freedom, individual responsibility, defense of free trade, strong American leadership, and that's my concern. Populism gives way to scapegoating certain groups and to driving wedge issues rather than traditional conservatism.
So was there, in relation to the Republican platform over the last so many years, was there elements of it that you thought were xenophobic or nativist?
Not so much in the platform. You have to remember that after the Mitt Romney lost in 2012, we conducted as a party an autopsy and said we've got to stop playing to a small audience. We've got to be more accepting. George W. Bush, as I point out in the book, won his election with 56% of the white vote. A few years later, Mitt Romney lost with 59% of the white vote. We can't continue to be just a party of old white guys. We've got to appeal to a larger audience.
So when
the party when we passed legislation, it started, I think, with Prop 187 in California, where you might be able to rile up the base for an election cycle.
Tell people what 187 is.
The 187 was a provision in California, a proposition, back in the early 90s, which said we're going to deny benefits when most benefits were already denied to illegal immigrants. And it was something that was seen to rile up the base and get people excited, and it did. Republicans won in terms of the governorship in California, but that's until Arnold Schwarzenegger, and since Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's been the only statewide office that Republicans have held because Republicans were seen as a party that was becoming xenophobic and becoming too nationalist. And that's the danger, I think, that we have going forward. When we have a candidate in our president who made statements like this the first day that he ran, talked about Mexicans coming across are rapists, and then made statements throughout which just weren't flattering and weren't, I don't think, conservative.
So how did he win? How did he win the presidency of Romney?
Well, that's exactly what I say. You can win elections. Populism is called populism for a reason. It's popular. You can gin up the base and maybe eke out another election cycle. But we as a party, every election we are 2% less white as a country. And to drill down and not try to appeal to a larger audience just won't work for us in the long run. And it's not a governing philosophy either. You can talk about building a wall. Obviously we need better border security. I've supported that all along. But just focusing on a couple of things that really aren't a governing philosophy, no way to move forward. We've got a complicated immigration problem. We have 11 million illegal aliens who are here that we have to deal with. We have DACA kids who were brought across the border when they were young. What are we going to do? Deport them all? Of course not.
So what do you want? What do you want to do?
Well, I spelled that out in the bill, the Senate bill that we did. SB 10. I'm sorry, the Senate bill was SB 744.
Refresh our memory.
This was the Senate bipartisan bill in 2013, where we increased infrastructure and resources significantly on the border, doubled the number of Border Patrol agents, had funding for an additional 700 miles of fencing or barriers at the border. But we also said we're going to need interior enforcement, mandatory E-Verify, but then we have a mechanism for those who are here illegally. It doesn't assume we're going to deport everyone.
What are we going to do? What do you want to do with them? The 11 million that are here. What should we do with them?
Well, if they're those who have committed criminal offenses, other than having crossed the border illegally, they would not be allowed to adjust their status. But many of those who didn't, many of those who are here, there would be a way for them to become regularized or become citizens, perhaps, after a 20-year period, I think was about the fastest way anybody could. It was a long and arduous path, but it didn't assume that we were going to deport everybody. And for DACA kids, the DREAM Act was included. I don't think that kids ought to be punished when their parents brought them across the border when they were 2 years old or 10 years old.
So why didn't this beautiful bipartisan bill not pass?
It did pass the Senate with 68 votes. It didn't pass the House. But I think that that's the path that we have to move forward, is a realistic proposal. I didn't get everything I wanted in that bill, but you never do. When you have the Senate and you have to have 60 votes to pass something, you'll never get everything you want. But it was a good, solid bill in terms of border enforcement, interior enforcement, and a realistic mechanism to deal with those who are here illegally. Plus, we have to realize we're going to have labor needs in the future. We're down to 4% unemployment in the country, and you can argue that's not the real unemployment rate. Maybe it isn't, but we're going to need significant immigration in the future, both dealing with those who are here now and with legal immigration moving forward. And we, in the bill as well, we dealt with legal immigration with a point system. much like was outlined by Senator Perdue, and Senator Cotton the other day, where we take into account more the skills that people bring to the table when we're deciding what levels of immigration we have. Now, I happen to believe that we can't cut legal immigration levels in half like that bill proposed, but we should move to more of a point system, and that was in the bill 744 as well. But what I'm trying to say is Republicans have to have actually realistic solutions moving ahead, and not just slogans, and not just try to rile up the base. Because, like I said, you might be able to eke out another election victory somewhere, but the long-term future for the party is not good if we go down that road.
So basically, the people who are spouting this out as the president, you went to Prop 187. I guess there's people running for office that are spouting this xenophobic stuff, and I guess, you know, the white rednecks of the party. Is that where we're at on who's the xenophobia and conservatism?
That's not my description. I say in Arizona.
Well, I'm just telling what you said. We know that you know what you said about the president. You talked about Prop 187, and you said the party talks about this. So who? That's the thing that's what I'm trying to get to, Jeff, is you make this general conservatives or xenophobes. And when I first heard it, I said, man, is he playing to a poll for re-election? And I know you're usually not into that, so that's why I was surprised that you went to the xenophobe card on conservatives in the party. So I got the president, Prop 187, and made Arnold Schwarzenegger, and people are spouting this off. So clarify for me.
What I explained in the book is that, and I talked about, like I said, the direction of the party prior to the president. Like we gave away our conservative credentials with regard to fiscal conservatism. And that has forced the party to move into wedge issues, like I said, like flag burning and immigration scapegoating. And I just don't think that that's the direction we're going to go. In Arizona, we had, SB 1070 as well. These things rile up the base, but they aren't a governing philosophy, and they aren't a way forward for the party. In Arizona, we're in a much better place. We have a great governor who doesn't play on wedge issues. The state legislature has largely moved away from that posture. So we're in a much better place in Arizona. But I can tell you, it's not the future of the party to just play to a smaller base. We've got to be more inclusive. I think that we did that. We made that realization as a party after the last election in 2012. And I think that that's certainly the way forward to move forward with inclusive policy that actually grows the base and plays to a larger audience.
Hey, Senator, I have a couple of calls, but I got to go visit some sponsors. Do you have one more segment I can get out of you?
You bet.
Thank you. We got Senator Jeff Flake on the line, 790-2040. Don and Vince will get to you when we come back. You're on the Wake Up Tucson show. Check out kvoi.com/podcast if you missed this. Or you want your friends to listen to this interview, go to kvoi.com/podcast later today. Ed Alexander spinning your tune. Wake Up Tucson, 10:30 The Boys.
What's on your mind? Wake up, Tucson. Call us now, 790-2040.
6:36 in the morning. You're on the Wake Up Tucson show. We're talking with Arizona Senator Jeff Flake. Jeff, thanks for holding on. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Let's go to East Side Don on line 3. Don, how's it going on the East Side? Don, where are you, buddy?
I didn't know where you're going first.
All right, Don.
Okay. All right. Senator, thanks for calling in. I'm concerned that if we do not have an Obamacare repeal and replace or reform or whatever you want to call it bill signed by the president in this calendar year, we're not going to get one before the next election, because I don't know how many times I've heard that politicians don't want to vote on very sensitive, very tumultuous legislation in an election year, and 2018 is an election year. Well, the ball is in your court in the Senate. The House has passed their version of Obamacare reform, and you haven't. So are my concerns valid? Are we not going to get a bill to President Trump for him to sign this year?
Don, thanks for the call, buddy.
Thanks, Don. I do think your concerns are valid. I think it's unlikely that we are going to get something. Well, certainly not. We're not going to get something that's just signed with Republican votes. We tried that, and we didn't have the votes. This is obviously Obamacare. I think the Democrats knew well when it was put in place 6 years ago that it would be very tough to be seen to be taking away entitlement that people have been given. And so we're short the votes. I voted to continue, obviously. I voted for the so-called skinny repeal. About 200,000 Arizonans will wake up today without health insurance, having already paid a fine to the federal government for not being able to purchase that insurance. And an even greater number will have coverage but not really have care because they have deductibles that are so high, co-pays that are so high that they can't afford to utilize their insurance. So we desperately need reform here.
So Jeff, who's the speed bumps? Who's the speed bumps in this process? Now I'm just what are the forces that can't get 51 votes in the Senate? What's the problem here what's on the back end? Is it the hospital? Is it the hospitals? What's going? Because the hospitals have made out like bandits the last so many years because now everyone else is paying for their uncompensated care. So what is it?
Well, I mean, there are two real parts of Obamacare that we have to deal with, the so-called exchanges, which Arizona is ground zero for the failure of the exchange.
Yep.
But then Medicaid expansion. Arizona is one of the expansion states. But other states, 20-some states have expanded Medicaid as well. So they have a large Medicaid population, and there was concern that this path forward for Republicans, that this would somehow affect that population. Now, the last legislation we voted on, the so-called skinny repeal, only dealt with the exchanges, only dealt with the mandate on the employer and the employee side.
Right.
So I don't think that those concerns were valid, but I think that those concerns were still being raised. And this wasn't sold very well. It was a tough vote for people, and frankly, I don't think that bringing it back to the floor and just trying to pass it with Republican votes is going to get it over the top. It's just not. We tried it. I voted for it, but we didn't get it.
What do you have to give? What do you have to give the Democrats to get a few to come over?
That's the question right now. The committee is meeting. Lamar Alexander is a smart guy, a good conservative. Patty Murray is the Democrat on that committee. He believes that he can work with her and we can bring some Democrats across. Now, the Democratic leadership, I think, has been kind of largely captured by the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren kind of wing of the party right now. But there are some Democrats, the Joe Manchins, the Joe Donnellys, the Heidi Heitkamps, and others who I think we might be able to get our way with a different proposal. I think that one that shows promise is the one that Lindsey Graham and Bill Cassidy have pushed, which would simply say, let's take what we're spending now and block grant most of it to the states and let them find out. This is still, we're going to still have to find a way to make this sustainable over time, but it might be a way to get some of the states and some of the senators who, on the Democratic side, haven't gone for it to go for it.
When you came into office as quite a deficit hawk. And David Schweikert last week was on the show and says it looks like we're going to borrow about $2 billion a day to keep this thing going coming up. So as a guy who came in as a deficit hawk, you do your the crazy pork barrel weird projects like Shrimp Fight Club and all this stuff. If you get reelected, I mean, shouldn't this be coming out of everyone's mouth all the time? Is how do we stop? Because that's the part that's so sickening about all of the Senate and most of the Congress is no one wants to talk about this.
That's right. And I think we were negligent in the campaign, the last one, in not requiring of our candidates to raise this issue. Now, some were. But if you remember, President Trump during the election said he wasn't going to touch the entitlement programs. Medicaid, Medicare were not going to be touched. We can't do that. We can't continue to add, as David Schweikert said, right now it's about $2 billion a day. Within a decade, we're going to be over $1 trillion deficits every year to add to $20 trillion in debt. And here's what worries me. And part of the book, I talk not just about being a conservative in terms of policy, but to be a conservative in terms of comportment and demeanor and manners. And my biggest concern is to solve the issues like debt and deficit, we have no choice but to reach across the aisle and to work with Democrats. If you look over the last 40 years, every decent budget agreement we've had has been when Republicans and Democrats have said, all right, we're going to share the political risk because no one party, if that party controls the House, the Senate, and the White House, will ever take the political risk required to solve the deficit and debt problem, which means we've got to reform our entitlement programs. And that's why, you've seen people just shy away from it now. And we can't continue to do that. And so in order to achieve conservative ends, which is getting a hold of our debt and deficit, we're going to need to work with people across the aisles. And it's tough to do that when we refer to them as clowns or losers. And that concerns me greatly.
Actually,
it can't continue.
What equally concerns me is most of Senate leadership is a bunch of old white people who will be dead by the time the bill comes. They do, and that's the part that's sickening. Is their view of this is so short. Okay.
Yeah, it's Senator McCain has referred to it as generational theft.
He says that, but he doesn't do anything about it. And I've gotten in with John before on this. He likes to say generational theft, but if you're him, I want him just to be, he's getting all of his hero accolades for shooting down the skinny repeal, but he says things, I forgot, I wanted to turn this into a McCain thing. Anyway, let's get a phone call and then I'll let you go. Let's go to Vince on line 2. He's been holding very patiently. Vince, thanks for the call.
Hey, good morning, Senator.
Morning.
Hi, hi there. I don't think calling people clowns is quite as bad as calling people Nazis, but I guess we'll just ignore that part. But what I wanted to mention was we now have 35 governorships. Last time I noticed about 1,000 seats state and locally have been flipped, and the Republicans now have them, and people wrote in on Trump's back for the House and Senate. So I don't think we're doing all that terribly. But I noticed last week that there's 42,000 federal prisoners that are illegal immigrants, and we don't seem to hear much about that. I don't know what the numbers are in the state and local level, but these aren't all Boy Scouts and choir boys like you try to paint them. They're just trying to work hard for a living. So I just wanted your comments on that.
Thanks for the call, Vince.
Well, thanks. You may be referring to an op-ed I wrote last week talking about growing up on a ranch in northern Arizona and growing up with migrant labor. I'm under no illusion that everybody who comes across the border is here to work. We have in our prisons certainly illegal aliens who've committed crimes. There should be no place in America for that. But at the same time, we have to recognize that there are many hardworking immigrants who have come across, and we've got to deal with that. So and with regard to our majorities around the country, yes, we've done very well electorally. But my concern is, are we achieving conservative goals and ends? And if you talk about the debt and the deficit, we aren't. And that's what concerns me. I want to be a conservative, not just to get elected, but to achieve conservative ends.
So
we're not doing that right now. I don't think that we stand to do that if we continue with the type of rhetoric that's been used and the type of policies that we've put forward.
Whenever your Senate career is over, whenever it is, what is the one thing you would like legislatively to be known for when it's all over? What would be your main goal?
To have gotten our debt and deficit under control, by far, going away. And that's going to require the so-called grand bargain at some point, where we do a larger version of what Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did back in the early 80s.
So where
we sit down both parties, and it's going to require, because like I said, no one party is going to do it alone. and do the Simpson Bowles type. We all know the contours of what we have to do. It involves, more significant means testing on Medicare. It means some kind of chain CPI on Social Security. We've had commissions that have looked at this, for ages.
Yep.
We all know what we've got to do. We just got to have the political courage to do it.
So
and that's what I want to do. But I can tell you, we can't do it if we just say, all right, we're going to stick to our own clan here in the Republican Party and not reach across the aisle and not try to bring people in. It just won't happen, and we'll do just as you explained so well. We'll all, just pass it on. We'll all leave office and leave it to the next generation, and that's not right. That's why I think we have to be willing to take the tough votes on the debt and deficit.
So what is your faith level, 1 to 100, 100 being the highest, in the majority of the American people taking a pay cut on their any kind of government check or benefit that they get? And they'll be okay with it. And that's the tough part.
I think that people can be convinced if they want a better future for their kids and their grandkids, we've got to put the government on a sustainable path. And the thing is, right now, if we deal with these issues right now, we still have a chance of people going for it. But the problem is, if we wait until the financial markets speak and say, you're no longer such a good bet, and interest rates have to go up in order to get people to buy our debt, then we're going to be spending almost all of our discretionary income. Everything we spend on defense, everything we spend on infrastructure or roads, everything the federal government does is going to be spent just servicing the debt. If interest rates pick up just a couple of points, that's going to be the case. And so I want to move before that time. And your question of what I want to accomplish before I leave the Senate, that's the big one. And I don't see the political courage or the will to deal with it right now.
I don't see it coming anytime soon, Jeff. But thank you for calling in. Sorry I was a little rough on you, but I don't see you often. I had to get some things off my chest.
Well, I appreciate it. You have a good show, and I'll try to be on more often. I really will.
Excellent. Thanks, Senator.
Hey, thanks, Mitch.
All right, that's Senator Jeff Flake. Let's go pay some bills.